Hello, my name is Kate, and today I'll be talking to you about generative AI and how that affects authenticity in the workplace. But first, story time. So, about a year ago, I went to a military promotion ceremony where the guy promoting asked his supervisor to say a speech about him. He got up and basically said, "I'm no good at writing speeches, so I let ChatGPT write the speech for me." And then he went on to give the most generic, dry, speech I've ever heard about a person. This was especially problematic because there were over 100 people in the audience, some of them very high ranking, as well as the guy promoting had invited his entire family and some of his friends to the ceremony. So you could feel the tension in the crowd when his supervisor really had nothing authentic to say about working with him. So this made me wonder, what happens to authenticity when we allow AI to speak for us? First of all, here's a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll look at generative AI uses in the workplace, how AI shapes people's perception of our authenticity, how AI can either enhance or weaken communication, when it is or isn't appropriate to use AI in the workplace, and a few guidelines for using it if you are going to use it. The bottom line is this. Generative AI can help us communicate more efficiently, but it cannot completely replace authentic human communication. So starting off with the workplace, how is AI used? According to Emily DeJoux from Carnegie Mellon University, AI can support every stage of composition, whether that's concept generation, writing outlines, drafting reports, revising or editing works, or even automating tasks. We see it in pretty much every industry nowadays, and if it isn't already there, it will be soon, because generative AI capability and application is growing tremendously. If you look in the graph to the bottom, you'll see that as of 2025, about $22 billion was spent on generative AI software, and then as of 2030, they are projecting about $204 billion to be spent on software spending, according to Bloomberg Intelligence. That's a huge increase, so I don't think generative AI is going away anytime soon. However, despite this growth, according to Samuel from the Harvard Business Review, AI messages are still seen as less credible. Now, let's take a little turn and talk about authenticity. Why does it matter to be authentic? Well, first of all, humans want to talk to humans. I don't know if you've ever called a company about a mistaken charge or a problem you have and you get connected with a robot, and it's more frustrating than the problem you had to begin with, because usually when we have a problem, we want somebody who can hear and understand what we're going through and relate to us. So humans want to talk to humans. We want to hear a personal voice. We want them to have empathy to our situation, and we want to be able to give them context for what we're going through so that they actually understand us. Second of all, positive experiences help shape that relational trust. So when we're authentic, we build our own credibility. When we're authentic, people feel comfortable self-disclosing things to us, and we're able to build relationships better. And lastly, lived experience plays into our authenticity. So whether you're giving a lesson and you share what you've learned and how that information has helped you, or if you're at a promotion talking about your experience with somebody, lived experience shows our authenticity. Now, how does AI shape other people's perception of our authenticity? Credibility drops when the message is perceived as AI generated. I'm sure you feel that way too. People lose trust in the speaker, and they feel like the speaker doesn't care about what they're talking about when it isn't their own personal message. AI messages have a generic tone, and it's pretty easy to differentiate what came from a computer versus what came from a person, because there's a loss of personal voice. Gertary and Cacciatrain wrote a report on meaningful writing in the age of AI, and they talk a lot about the importance of your personal voice in writing. Now, back to my story about the promotion ceremony. What made that promotion speech feel inauthentic? First of all, ChatGPT cannot express lived experience, and we talked about how important that is to authenticity. It had no personal stories or emotional nuance, and the speaker did not make an effort to include anything personal on top of what AI already spit out. He literally read from a page, and it felt so cold and not personal. And the audience expected the promotee to be honored at that ceremony because it was in his honor. So expectations were not met, and the speaker tanked his own credibility by not having anything authentic to say. So the perception of authenticity in a speech or in professional writing comes from people's perception of our real life experience. So basically, if we're able to get up and give a speech and use our personal experience, people will perceive us as authentic. But if we're just saying basic words or reading from a script, they won't feel that that's authentic. Now, how does AI enhance our communication? Well, a lot of us use it, whether it's for work or for our personal lives, and we know that it helps us with efficiency and clarity in writing. It helps reduce errors if you ask it to edit your essay and look for any spelling or grammar errors, and it's able to manage large amounts of data. So whether you need your thoughts organized or filtered, or mitigating redundancy, making sure you didn't say the same thing twice. So it can be a very helpful tool for drafting and revising. And if you're in a leadership role, it can help simplify or clarify messages so that all kinds of people will understand what you're trying to say. That being said, we should treat AI as a co-writer, not a ghostwriter. So you'll see in the bottom left that about 39% of Americans use AI, indicated by that blue circle. On the right side, however, it shows that only about 31% of Americans trust AI, and only 2% of Americans fully trust it. So even less than the people who use it trust AI. So anyway, when you're giving a speech or a presentation and you're heavily relying on AI, that's a big red flag that people aren't going to trust what you're saying. So give credit where credit's due. Be fully transparent when you're using AI so that people know how much of your message they should trust and what role AI played in it. Now let's talk about how AI weakens communication. It uses cookie-cutter tone and words, so it's not necessarily going to be the most engaging to the audience we're speaking to. It also weakens critical thinking skills. Painter from the University of Vermont has a report on generative AI use in undergraduate writing, and they conclude that it really does diminish those critical thinking skills. So the more you rely on AI to write products for you, the less likely you're going to be able to come up with conclusions on your own going forward. AI also reproduces a lot of bias. So just like people are a product of their environment and the things they've learned, AI is the same. It uses other sources to learn what it knows, and it's not always something we agree with. It's not always correct. So make sure that you're always aware of bias that could be reproduced in generative AI products. Using AI can harm credibility because if you don't double check sources or make sure that you actually agree with or know what it's saying, it can look pretty bad to the people you're speaking or presenting to. Generative AI also removes a lot of the emotion and voice that you would have if you wrote something yourself. So messages can seem insincere because it just can't replicate authentic emotion. So that creates a disconnect between the audience and speaker when they don't feel that you actually care about what you're saying. All in all, workplace relationships and credibility really do depend on perceived authenticity, which is diminished when we don't speak for ourselves. Now, I came up with a few examples of when I think it's appropriate to use AI. One example would be drafting a reminder about a meeting. Basically, you just need the time, the date, and what the meeting is about. There's no emotions involved in this. Also, revising wording to enhance clarity is a good use for AI. Creating standardized product descriptions, I would say, is appropriate because it's something completely standardized and it's pretty cut and dry information. Organizing concepts for a large report or product would be a decent use for it, as long as you're inputting your own information and revising it yourself after the outline is already there. Reviewing for spelling and grammar errors is a way that I like to use AI, and I think that's a totally appropriate way to use it. So my general rule of thumb is that generative AI is appropriate when the message is straightforward and does not require any kind of empathy or personalization to the message. Now, when is it not okay to use AI? Some examples are responding to unhappy customers, because that's somebody who really needs to know that you're listening and know that you care. So AI would not be appropriate to use in that situation. Speaking in somebody's honor, just like the promotion ceremony I mentioned earlier, it has no personal voice, no storytelling capability, and no lived experience. So that wouldn't be a good use of generative AI. Handling sensitive news such as layoffs or pay changes or any kind of major changes that's going to affect somebody in their work life or personal life is not a good time to use generative AI. Anything that involves building or maintaining relationships, like a welcome letter or a thank you letter, where somebody needs that like extra personal touch. Also, anytime you're taking ownership for a product, you should probably not use generative AI because you're taking ownership for it, right? So make sure you're sourcing it every time you use it. If you're taking credit for it, only take credit for your own work. So my general rule of thumb here is that generative AI is not appropriate to use when the message requires empathy or trust, or when you're taking full credit for it. So my 5 guidelines for using generative AI while maintaining your authenticity is: number 1, focus on the human authored meaning. Make sure you're giving it all the information you want it to say, and make sure you're maintaining that message, because that's so important for maintaining the authenticity. 2, personalize the tone. You don't want to be reading straight off a paper and it doesn't sound like it came from you, right? So if you're giving a speech, you want it to feel natural. You want it to be in your own voice and your own tone. Number 3, add your own emotional and relational cues, whether that's stories or how you relate to the information you're sharing. That's going to help the listener also relate to the information. Number 4, be transparent about generative AI use. Again, give credit where credit is due. And number 5, double check for bias or cookie cutter phrasing. This will help avoid any kind of offense or keep the audience engaged, or just make sure that the information is coming from you. Bottom line is, we should make every effort to maintain the intent, culture, and empathy of authentic human written message if we are going to use generative AI. In summary, here are the topics we talked about again, and my key takeaway is generative AI can help us communicate more efficiently, but it cannot replace authentic human communication. And here are my sources. Thank you for listening.